There's a palatable tension in the air. Do you feel it? This is the feeling of black people standing up to our nation's racist systems. Another unarmed black man is shot. Collectively, we mourn as we ask the question again. How many times does the attempted arrest of a black person have to turn into murder before it is no longer an isolated event? Wasn't what we witnessed with George Floyd more than enough to change things? Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, Tamir Rice, Philando Castile, Michael Brown, Tyree Nichols, and the list goes on and on and on. Black people shot or beaten by the police. Their lives ended far too soon. Something is horribly wrong when our nation treats people like this. Many suggest that this is a sin problem and not a skin problem. I disagree. Seeking to generally focus on the universal sin involved would be similar to dismissing murder as a mere lack of oxygen. It conveniently denies the cause of death. More accurately, we should say this is a sin and skin problem, because these particular sins continue to be perpetuated by those who are white against those who are black. The sin of racism cannot be separated from the power and privilege of white people in America. When well-intentioned white people dismiss this as just an isolated event or just a bad apple in the proverbial bunch, the larger point is missed. I believe that many in white normative culture want to point to the individual and not to the system when evaluating culpability, because to correctly point out systemic issues indicts all of us and not just some of us. As Americans, we desperately want to maintain the illusion of equity and justice when clearly the facts say otherwise. We are impersonators, frauds, posers, pretending that all is well when it isn't. America now closely resembles numerous towns and rural localities that seek relevance and tourism based upon perpetuating histories that were never actually existent. Towns like Hannibal, Missouri. On an educational tour of the city, I discovered for myself the ironies of what Hannibal is and what it pretends to be. Just outside the boyhood home of Mark Twain, the American writer and speaker, is a picket fence where tourists are invited to stand with a bucket and a brush and pose for pictures as they whitewash the fence. Of course, there is no actual whitewash in the bucket, another facade in a town full of them. Even Hannibal's police cruisers are labeled with the home of Mark Twain. Everything in the city revolves around this identity, including actual Twain impersonators. I spotted one driving a minivan past the hotel. I've long been fascinated with impersonators, people who assume the identities of others, specifically the famous or infamous, in order to generate notoriety and income for themselves. For those who become successful at this enterprise, how odd it must be to be known as someone else. The issue of assumed identities versus repressed identities is at the center of Hannibal's history. I had two experiences with the competing identities of Hannibal, the Mark Twain experience and Jim's experience. The Mark Twain experience is highlighted by practically everything in Hannibal. The town owes its existence to Twain. However, Jim, a character featured in The Adventures of Huck Finn, an African-American whose slave and marginalized status is at the center of Twain's book, remains a contested topic among scholars. However, it is a clear example of the competing, repressed, and assumed identities of the community. Like the Twain impersonator driving the minivan, I get the sense that Hannibal wanted me to believe something about its identity that may be altogether inauthentic. As I entered the childhood home of Becky Thatcher, another character of conflation based upon Twain's childhood experiences, I was invited to experience life as one of the characters from Twain's books: Tom Sawyer, Huck Finn, Becky Thatcher, or Jim. I chose all four. My thinking was that this story is never complete without exploring every possible perspective. As I walked through this experience and interacted with the exhibits and completing different tasks, it occurred to me that this was reflective of the Hannibal experience. Everyone in town had a role and a task in promoting the imagined and real worlds of Mark Twain, the boundaries of which are sometimes difficult to discern. My Hannibal experience concluded in the basement of a historic black church with a performance of a very different impersonator. The actress on stage performed as Lena Mason, a notable African-American citizen of Hannibal. The small group that had assembled were moved to applause at the tremendous rendition of Mason's poem, The Negro in It. This is the identity of Hannibal that has long been repressed, an identity that is finally finding its voice. This pilgrimage to Hannibal highlighted for me the continuing tension in my own received, imposed white identity and my emerging authentic voice. What I see in Hannibal, what I see in Minneapolis, what I see all across America is all impacted by a white perspective that clouds everything. It is fitting that perhaps the main attraction in Hannibal is a whitewashed fence from Mark Twain's beloved book. The whitewash in many ways is still employed in Hannibal and in the darker regions of my own heart. I had intended to take a picture with the brush in my hand. Instead, I took pictures of Jim's journey and reflected on my own complicity. A better choice, I think. Like Hannibal, Missouri, America finds itself standing at a fence. The fence of racial division, inequity, and injustice looms large in our national experience. It remains to be seen if, as white Americans, we will continue to whitewash the tragic death of black people with tired cliches, or if we will rise to the urgency of the hour and take actions that will put an end to this madness. Stop with the whitewash.